In next 24 hours, American troops will enter the war. In the next 24 hours, a decision may be made in Washington that could quietly redraw the strategic map of the world. Not tomorrow, not next week, but possibly within the next few hours. Across the Middle East tonight, missile defense systems are cycling without rest. Radar screens glow in silent command rooms. Naval fleets hold position in dark waters, waiting for instructions that have not yet arrived, and thousands of miles away, inside a quiet building in Washington, a small group of decision makers may soon face a choice no administration ever wants to make: enter the war, or watch the balance of power begin to shift without them. For weeks, the United States has stood just outside the conflict, supporting, observing, calculating every possible consequence. But military history teaches one uncomfortable truth. There always comes a moment when staying out becomes more dangerous than stepping in. Strategists call it the threshold. And tonight, according to several defense analysts, that threshold may be approaching faster than anyone expected. If that moment arrives, if the order is given, the next 24 hours may trigger consequences far beyond the battlefield. Oil markets, shipping routes, currencies, supply chains, entire economies. Because when American troops move from observer to participant in a regional war, the world rarely stays the same. So the question tonight is no longer whether tensions are rising. The real question is far simpler and far more dangerous. In the next 24 hours, American troops will enter the war. Welcome to Warfront Global. If you've been with us for a while, you already know that here we do not chase headlines. We study the forces moving quietly underneath them. And if you're new here, allow a small reminder, the kind an old grandfather might gently give his family. Before we go any further, take a second and subscribe to the channel. Not for us, but so you never miss the signals that shape the future. And one more thing, we are curious tonight, where in the world are you watching this from? Tell us your city in the comments below, because what is unfolding right now may affect every single one of those cities. Now, let's begin. For weeks, the United States has occupied a careful position in the conflict unfolding between Iran and Israel, not inside the war, but not completely outside it either. American officials have described their role using careful language: support, coordination, defensive assistance. Yet behind those words lies a reality that strategic analysts understand very clearly. The United States is already present across the region. Naval forces patrol the eastern Mediterranean. Missile defense systems have been reinforced at Allied bases across Jordan and the Gulf. Long-range bombers have been observed flying patrol patterns that military analysts recognize immediately. The equipment is there, the personnel are there, the logistics network is already in place. Only one element is missing: the order. And in military strategy, the difference between preparation and action can sometimes be measured in hours. To understand why the next 24 hours matter, one must understand the concept military planners call the threshold. A threshold is not a line on a map. It is not defined by the number of missiles fired or casualties reported. A threshold is the moment when the cost of staying out of a conflict becomes greater than the cost of entering it. For months, Washington calculated that remaining outside the war remained manageable. Diplomatic pressure could contain escalation, weapons transfers could strengthen allies, intelligence sharing could help manage the battlefield without direct American involvement. But wars evolve, and sometimes they evolve in ways planners did not originally expect. Iranian military strategy appears to have shifted towards something analysts describe as sustained pressure. Rather than short symbolic attacks, operations increasingly focus on continuous waves of drones and missiles designed to stretch defensive systems over long periods of time. The goal is not immediate destruction. The goal is exhaustion. Every defensive system has limits. Interceptors must be replaced. Radar cycles must reset. Operators must rest. And when those systems are forced to operate continuously for extended periods, performance begins to decline. Engineers call this process operational fatigue. It rarely appears suddenly. Instead, efficiency slowly decreases until a defensive network approaches what strategists call its operational ceiling. When that happens, something else begins to appear: a coverage gap. And when a coverage gap begins to form in a region this strategically important, the pressure on Washington to decide its next move increases very quickly. When war enters the global economy, wars rarely begin with the first missile. For the global economy, they begin with something much quieter: a change in probability. Somewhere in shipping offices in Singapore, insurance desks in London, and energy trading floors in New York, analysts are not waiting for an official declaration of war. They are studying signals that often appear long before governments make announcements. And in the past several days, those signals have begun to shift. One of the earliest indicators of rising conflict risk is the behavior of shipping insurance markets. When a region moves closer to war, insurers increase what are known as war risk premiums. These additional costs are charged to vessels traveling through dangerous waters. The Eastern Mediterranean and the Persian Gulf are two of the most important shipping corridors in the world. Energy tankers, container ships, and bulk carriers pass through these routes every day carrying the raw materials that power global trade. When insurers increase premiums in these areas, it does not simply affect shipping companies. It increases transportation costs across entire supply chains. A cargo shipment that becomes more expensive to insure eventually becomes more expensive to deliver. And that cost travels quietly through the global economy. Food prices rise, energy prices follow, manufacturing costs begin to climb. None of this appears immediately on television screens, but the economic system notices quickly. The second signal appears in energy markets. Oil traders do not wait for a blockade or a military strike to adjust their expectations. They trade based on risk. At the center of this calculation sits one narrow corridor of water, the Strait of Hormuz. This passage connects the Persian Gulf to the open ocean, and through it passes roughly 1/5 of the world's traded oil every single day. Tankers leaving Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Kuwait, and the United Arab Emirates all pass through this corridor before reaching global markets. Iran sits directly beside this choke point. For decades, Iranian military doctrine has included contingency plans that focus on the strait. The strategy does not require a full blockade. Even the threat of disruption can slow tanker traffic dramatically. When naval tensions rise in the region, shipping companies often delay departures while they evaluate security risks. Energy traders understand this dynamic very well. And when traders believe that a military escalation involving the United States could place the strait under threat, prices begin to adjust, sometimes subtly, sometimes rapidly, but always ahead of the headlines. The third signal appears in the world's financial system. During moments of geopolitical uncertainty, investors tend to move their capital toward assets they believe are safest. Historically, the United States dollar has served that role. When global tensions rise, demand for dollars often increases, as investors shift funds toward American financial instruments such as treasury bonds. At first glance, this appears to benefit the United States. A stronger dollar attracts capital and stabilizes American financial markets. But beneath that stability lies a hidden consequence. Many developing economies borrow money in dollars. Their loans, trade contracts, and commodity imports are priced in the American currency. When the dollar strengthens quickly, their debt becomes more expensive almost overnight. Governments in these countries must spend more of their national income simply to service existing loans. At the same time, higher energy prices increase the cost of imported fuel and food. The pressure builds rapidly. Central banks in emerging economies are then forced to make difficult decisions: raise interest rates to defend their currencies, or allow inflation to accelerate inside their domestic economies. This is one of the least discussed effects of major geopolitical conflict. When a superpower enters war, the consequences travel far beyond the battlefield. They appear in foreign exchange markets, commodity contracts, and shipping invoices. And those consequences often arrive before the first official announcement is ever made, which is why economists and investors around the world are watching the next 24 hours just as carefully as military planners. Because if American troops enter the conflict, the first shock will not arrive through explosions. It will arrive through markets, quietly, mathematically, and globally. The strategy of exhaustion. While the world watches the movement of fleets and the language of diplomats, military planners are studying something far less dramatic: time. In modern warfare, time itself can become a weapon, not through speed, but through endurance. The side that can stretch a conflict longer than its opponent often changes the strategic balance without winning a single decisive battle. This appears to be the direction Iran's strategy is moving. Instead of relying on sudden, overwhelming strikes, Iranian operations have increasingly focused on sustained pressure. Waves of drones, rockets, and missiles launched over extended periods create a different type of battlefield dynamic. The objective is not simply to damage targets. The objective is to force defensive systems into constant engagement. Every defensive interception requires a chain of resources. Radar systems must track incoming objects. Command centers must evaluate trajectories. Interceptor missiles must be launched within seconds. Individually, each interception is a success, but collectively, they consume something extremely valuable: stockpiles. Interceptor missiles are sophisticated systems. They require precision manufacturing, specialized materials, and complex electronics. Replacing them is not a matter of hours or even days. Production cycles often stretch into months. Iranian planners understand this imbalance very clearly. A relatively inexpensive drone can force a defender to fire a much more expensive interceptor. When that exchange happens once, it means little. When it happens hundreds of times, the economics of the battlefield begin to change. Military analysts sometimes describe this situation as a resource war. Victory does not come from a single decisive strike. It emerges slowly from the gradual depletion of the opponent's defensive capacity. This process also affects the people operating those systems. Air defense crews work in rotating shifts. but sustained conflict pushes those rotations to their limits. Radar operators remain focused on screens for long hours. Maintenance teams must keep systems functioning under constant pressure. Over time, fatigue becomes part of the battlefield. Engineers refer to this stage as operational degradation. It is not a sudden collapse. Instead, it is a slow reduction in efficiency. Small errors appear, response times lengthen, maintenance delays accumulate. Individually, these problems may seem insignificant. Together, they create vulnerabilities. Strategic planners understand that the moment when defenses begin to wear down is often more important than the moment when they are first attacked. For Washington, this dynamic introduces a complicated calculation. If the defensive architecture of a key ally begins to weaken under sustained pressure, the pressure on the United States to intervene increases rapidly. But intervention carries its own consequences. Direct military engagement would expand the conflict significantly. It would involve American forces in a war whose timeline and scale could become unpredictable. This is why the debate inside Washington is not simply about military capability. It is about political cost, economic consequences, and long-term strategic commitments. Iran's approach appears designed to test precisely that hesitation, not by forcing immediate confrontation, but by stretching the situation gradually toward a point where the United States must decide whether to act or accept a shifting balance of power in the region. And that decision point may be approaching faster than many expected. Somewhere inside Washington tonight, a document is likely sitting on a table that the public will never see. It is not a battlefield map. It is not a classified intelligence report. It is something far more consequential. A decision matrix. In strategic planning, a decision matrix breaks down every available option, every likely reaction, and every economic and military consequence that could follow each choice. Analysts spend weeks building it. Senior officials review it repeatedly. And when the moment arrives, it becomes the framework through which leaders decide how far they are willing to go. Right now, according to many defense analysts, the United States is facing three possible paths. Each path leads to a very different future. The first option is direct military engagement. Under this scenario, American forces would move from support to active participation in the conflict. Airstrikes could target missile launch infrastructure, logistics networks, or military command systems. Naval forces could begin intercepting weapons shipments and restricting maritime supply routes. This option would send an unmistakable signal. The United States would be declaring that the conflict has crossed a threshold requiring direct intervention. Such a move could stabilize Allied defenses quickly. But it would also expand the war dramatically, drawing American forces into a confrontation whose duration and scope might become difficult to control. The second option is accelerated defensive reinforcement. In this scenario, the United States increases support without formally entering the war. Additional interceptor missiles, advanced radar integration, and intelligence coordination would strengthen defensive systems already operating in the region. The objective would be to close the emerging coverage gap without initiating offensive operations. Politically, this option allows Washington to maintain the language of support rather than war. Strategically, however, it still represents a deeper level of involvement and carries its own risks. Iranian planners would likely adapt their strategy in response, potentially extending the conflict further in an effort to maintain pressure. The third option is quiet de-escalation through diplomacy. This path rarely appears in public statements, yet it has played a role in many past conflicts. Through intermediaries, regional governments, or international partners, private negotiations can open channels for both sides to step back from escalation. These conversations often occur without public acknowledgement. They allow governments to reduce immediate tensions while preserving political narratives at home. But diplomacy requires conditions that allow both sides to claim some form of strategic restraint. In moments of rapidly escalating conflict, those conditions can disappear quickly. This is why the next 24 hours matter. The longer uncertainty persists, the more pressure builds across multiple systems at once. Military planners face rising operational strain. Energy markets react to growing risk. Shipping networks adjust their routes. Investors shift capital toward safer assets. Each of these responses may appear independent. In reality, they are interconnected signals. They represent the global system reacting to a single unresolved question. Will the United States cross the threshold from observer to participant? For governments, businesses, and investors around the world, the answer will shape far more than the battlefield. It will influence oil prices, trade routes, financial markets, and political alliances. History often remembers wars by their major battles, but strategic historians tend to focus on something else. The moments before those battles, the quiet hours when leaders weighed their options, studied the consequences, and chose the path that would shape the years ahead. Tonight may be one of those moments, and if the decision shifts the balance toward direct involvement, the world that emerges afterward may look very different from the one we recognize today.